Hey, everybody, come on in. We're going to do the obligatory, we'll wait for everybody to get settled and roll in and start momentarily. But very excited for the 2023 SEO Trends webinar by iPullRank. It's predictions, fictions, and colorful descriptions. You know how it is. But I'm excited to talk about this with Zach. Zach and I have been having fun preparing for this webinar. Zach, how are you doing on this lovely Thursday in December?
I'm doing fantastic. It is beautiful weather down here, and excited to talk about what we're looking at for the next year of SEO.
Oh my gosh. And it's so funny. I mean, obviously you'll see a little bit of an AI content theme throughout the webinar, but have you been playing with Chat GPT over the
Of
last
course,
few weeks?
of course. Who hasn't been? Yes, I've been having some fun. I've had some very existential conversations with GPT, and I've just been using it to poke around and have a little bit of fun. So it's
It
interesting.
almost reminds me. Do you remember Omegle back in the day, or was it Omegle, or there was like one of those like AI chats? I want to say like 10 years ago. That
Is that
was
the one that
very big.
Microsoft made?
I want to say yes, and I think I remember there being a myth. I can't remember if it was the fact of like the responses from the AI chat at the time were actually other people who thought they were responding to you, or if it was like actual AI. But I remember the technology was like, it was like 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I remember back in the day, like Yahoo Messenger, and I'm gonna say back in the day loosely, but like Yahoo Messenger and AIM had all the bots that were built into it that you could, in theory, have some conversations with. Whether they were good or not is a debatable question. But I think Microsoft definitely did something a couple of years ago. It might have been more of a Twitter thing. I'm trying to remember, but I remember it went very badly. Like it went
Really? Like how
very
so?
politically incorrect very quickly.
Well, that is one of the potential issues that we're going to discuss when it comes to these AI content generators. For everyone who's joining in, we're about to start up, but if you could in the chat, feel free to let us know who you are, where you're watching us from. What are your SEO trend predictions for 2023? We're going to dive into so many like ridiculous ones and obvious ones and boring ones. It's going to be a lot of fun. So just drop in the chat, say hi, tell us what's going on, and we are going to start up this wonderful webinar. So welcome everybody. 2023 SEO trends, predictions, fictions, and colorful descriptions. My name is Garrett Sussman. I am the demand generation manager at iPullRank. I am joined today by Zach Chahalis. Zach, tell me a little bit about yourself, your experience at SEO, and what you do at iPullRank.
Yeah, so I'm currently the director of SEO here at iPullRank, so I run a lot of the day-to-day strategy development and execution for our clients. I am a mostly lifelong agency guy, so I've been the agency side now for well over a dozen years in my career. Spent a little bit of time in-house, but I work a ton with enterprise level sites, big brands, e-commerce sites. Love kind of digging into some complex SEO problems.
I'm excited. I mean, you and I, we've been doing like the SEO Battle Zone, which is one of the video series where you, myself, and Michael King all talk about like controversial topics in SEO. And so for those of you who don't know Zach knows his stuff, has a lot of like great, strong opinions. So check out that series. But let's dive in to SEO trends in 2023. So why not start off with the fact that SEO trends are garbage? In the SEO industry, we love talking about trends. We love talking about what's new and what's coming out. But in reality, boring SEO fundamentals are still everything. Zach, would you say that's the case? It all comes down to the fundamentals.
More often than not, yes. Occasionally you see something that is kind of a new trend or something to play with, but yeah, most of the time.
But that's not going to stop us from having an entire webinar dedicated to all the trends that we're seeing. In fact, last year we had this really cool blog post where we reached out to over 40 SEOs in the community and asked them what their boring SEO predictions were, and they delivered. For instance, Google will roll out several new algorithms throughout the year, and there will be winners and losers from this, which was very true in 2022. Quality content will matter. Shocker, it does. It really, really does. And links, internal and external, will continue to be relevant. Zach, do you think links are still relevant?
Yes. Tragically, unfortunately, depends on how you want to look at it. Mostly negatively, but yes, unfortunately, they are still very relevant.
It's a matter of perspective. So what trends do SEOs need to jump in on? Well, before we even did this, I said, at the beginning that AI content would probably be a theme of this entire webinar. So I said, why not ask the rage all around Chat GPT. And so I said, what are the best SEO trends for 2023? And God, maybe the most perfect answer, which is why we did have to have this webinar. So ChatGPT, who you all don't know, or if you don't know, is a large language model trained by OpenAI. And it told us, I do not have access to current information on the latest SEO trends, as my training data only goes up until 2021, and I am not able to browse the internet. Aha. The field of SEO is constantly evolving, and what may have been considered best practices in 2021 may no longer be relevant or effective in 2023. It would be the best to consult with a professional in the field or product your own research to learn about the latest SEO trends for 2023, which is kind of a glimpse into what we're going to cover when it comes to AI content. However, if you didn't know that, a lot of these AI models are using past historic documents and it's not dynamic and up to date, you need to keep that in mind because things change. Zach, any thoughts on that?
No, I certainly been trying to play with that a little bit myself and just kind of see if it could give me some thoughts around sports information, teams. Tried to provoke opinions, but obviously, you're pushing a little bit there. But not surprised by that answer one bit. I definitely run into the 2021 year cutoff.
And to that point, I mean, obviously, if you do need a professional for SEO, you know where to find us at iPullRank. We don't want to get too salesy. We'll save the end for that. But our brief commercial is if you do need SEO help, that's what we do at this agency. So what are we going to cover? Unveiling the curtain for SEO trends, recession SEO. So basically, with the macroeconomics of a recession, how does that impact SEO? Contextual organic search journeys. We'll talk a little bit about how the SERPs are changing and what you need to know there. E-commerce SEO trends, entity SEO, which we've done some webinars about in the past and like to geek out over. AI content, obviously, boring SEO fundamentals, and community predictions. So let's dive in. Recession SEO. So SEO in a recession, if you did ask, investors in terms of if they think a recession is coming, because over the past year, whether talking about inflation or supply chain issues, we've heard a lot of talk about this impending recession that's coming. And so, if your marketing team, your marketing budget, everything's getting sliced, you need to take that into consideration with your SEO projects and campaigns, because in a recession, businesses often slash their budgets, reduce capital spending, and lay off workers. And we've seen this in the tech industry. Zach, have you seen these signs with the recession?
I have, yes. I mean, I'm a car guy at heart, and I've certainly been fascinated with that market as a whole, but seeing the impact on prices, availability, default rates, everything that's kind of going on with that industry is kind of a little bit telling in terms of what we might see elsewhere. But there are also some signs that indicate that we may not be. So certainly something to keep an eye on. But I mean, obviously the market ebbs and flows. It's going to have its great days. It's going to have its bad days. At some point, we're going to get a recession. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, exactly. And not all recessions are the same. Like the housing market crashed in 2008, the pandemic in 2020, even back in the 1980s, the stock market crash, there are all these different reasons for why a recession happens. But the ultimate takeaway when it comes to a recession and your SEO is that consumer behavior changes dramatically. We saw this most recently at the pandemic when everybody's inside and you have these macroeconomic market conditions where obviously with an actual disease, people aren't going to be going out to restaurants. They're going to be cooking at home. They're not going to be spending on travel. They're not going to be spending on big purchase prices as much furnitures and auto spending. That usually starts dropping months before a recession. So there's a whole range of industries. Zach, you've worked in a ton of industries. What do you see in terms of consumer spending?
I mean, that certainly has changed. So I've worked with a lot of different retailers and businesses of all shapes and sizes. So at one point, working with like a home builder, for example, they start seeing spikes during the quote unquote pandemic recession because a lot of people were trying to leave big cities and move into homes in the suburbs. I think Netflix is a very good example of everything that's kind of going on in that space where, hey, everyone signed up for Netflix when, they were stuck home and not able to do anything. And I guess they didn't foresee that people were going to maybe cancel their subscription when they could go outside again. But I mean, there's definitely those types of facets. I've worked with a I don't know what you want to call it, entertainment retailer, where like obviously they saw big spikes during the pandemic because people were stuck at home and wanted to buy things that they could enjoy at home.
Right.
Other brands went down, like hotels.
And that's the thing with industries is like, yes, like I don't think it necessarily will knock out industries, but like financial services, people are going to be hyper aware of their money. So they're going to, focus and reach out. Media and publishers will probably do well because people are going to be consuming the news and there are opportunities there. So it really is an industry by industry basis, but it's something that you have to consider in terms of your resources, your market, the type of content you're creating, and what people are actually searching for. So do you want to speak to this, Zach, when it comes to why it's actually risky to cut SEO during a recession?
Yeah, I know. I'll speak to real quick. We had a very good Battle Zone episode recently with both of us, along with Mike, where we kind of talked about this general idea. But you really don't want to cut that SEO spending during a recession because it's almost like you stop investing in your 401k and divest it. It's just inefficient, right? So in order to really be successful from an SEO standpoint, you need to continually invest in it and keep improving it, because if you stop, your competitors are not necessarily going to. And the industry, the algorithms, everything's going to continue to change around you and you're standing still. So that's going to hurt you in the long run. And then trying to recover from that when you do want to increase your spending again, now you've got a bigger uphill battle to face. The other consideration too is SEO is often, depending on how you look at it, usually cheaper than a lot of other channels and tactics. So, paid, you're definitely going to get more of that immediate return on investment with something. Put $1 in, get $5 out, whatever your ROAS might be. But on the SEO side, usually you're investing a little bit less in the beginning, but you get that longer term health and benefit. And in theory, starts to kind of pay for itself when you're ranking naturally in search engines versus trying to have to fight for a paid placement. But that's the thing that, like I said, down here at the bottom, if you cut back now, everyone else is going to keep moving forward. So if you're ranking well now and you decide to cut your spend, think you're good, think you're never going to drop, you will. Your competitors will get better. You might fall off page one. You might disappear entirely. It just depends.
And the proof to this too is you only have to look at as recently as the pandemic, where during the recession, a lot of businesses do tighten up. They look for efficiencies, and a lot of those efficiencies are around reevaluating consumer behavior, and then kind of tightening up the ship with their SEO. So, like, speaking of, when you start to think about what you need to know, Zach has this great analogy for your website and your presence.
Great might be optimistic. I like cheesy analogies, as most of my team will attest to. So I like to think about SEO in the form of essentially kind of three pillars, but I like to think of it as a house analogy. So your technical foundation of your site, the ability for your content to be accessible, crawlable, for search engines to get through it, that's the foundation of your house. So you want that to be strong before you build that house on top of it. The actual house is represented by your content. That also includes things like metadata, potentially schema, your headers, everything that's kind of going on there. But if your foundation is not solid, how long is that content going to hold up, or is it even going to get found? And then I've always kind of said, like, your offsite perspective is kind of like the neighborhood that you live in. You could have the nicest house, but if it's in the worst area of town, what does that do to the value of your house in the long run? So there's a lot of things at play there, but it's always been my cheesy analogy to go to.
But I love it just because it is so relevant. There, the way to think about how you're approaching your SEO isn't just pumping out blog posts or, making sure that you have a couple of 404s that are not, or no longer appearing. It's so much more holistic like that than that. And so what do you actually need to do? There are two like kind of main components. We've been talking about this consumer behavior in search. So when it comes to audience research, what you should be doing is paying attention to the changing consumer habits. One thing that was just interesting right now, just how like consumer habits in search change constantly. Just the other day, I was looking at the Stanley Cup, which is, you know, traditional, the trophy that you win in the NHL and hockey. But there's also been this brand recently that's become really popular. It's like a Yeti competitor tumblers called Stanley, and they make Stanley Cups. And because it's become so incredibly popular, it's actually winning in the SERPs. Like, because people want it and the search intent is for this e-commerce product, you're seeing like information about it go up constantly. Another example that I love is from Lily Ray's back during the pandemic, when everybody was inside, when it's another sports analogy, but when you were looking up, you know, football, you know, usually you would see information about the NFL, but because the NFL was canceled at the time, that instead of Google is showing results around video games, football video games. And so the whole SERPs changed. And so in the recession, the way your customers are searching and what they're searching for is changing. Do you have any thoughts on that, Zach, when it comes to the consumer behaviors and how you understand search?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, and another good example, even on the sports side too, is I saw it with racing. Again, being a car guy, so there was no racing going on. Google was prioritizing the results of real racers participating in simulated gaming racing. So, you know, Google is looking to support what users are wanting to see, right? So if they have that demand for something, that's kind of where it's going to start to shift to. So you need to account for that customer demand shift if you want to stay at the top of your game.
Right. So if you've been doing customer research, you're talking to your customers, you're asking them questions about how they're searching. Once you start to see that shift, once you start to see trends, and so now's like one of the best times ever to be doing that customer research and putting out surveys and, you know, having those interviews, then you're going to want to adjust your actual content strategy in the context of SEO, which we'll talk about in a moment. On the content side, you know, if you are going to be cutting the budget and you already have a ton of content, we're just talking about tightening up the ship. So rebalancing and refreshing your past content, looking and auditing your content and looking at what needs to be updated, what needs to be pruned, what needs to be merged, thinking about your site architecture. Like, how would you look at that, Zach, like in terms of the recession and tightening that up?
Yeah, I mean, that's where, you know, if you're cutting spending in other areas, I would recommend investing in content and making your site sound. You know, I'll give a good example here. I've seen recently in some searches for queries around like insurance, for example, where there are actually dates getting published in SERPs, and that happens on a lot of different queries at this point. So if your content starts to appear out of date on a topic that people are looking for the most recent information on, you're kind of putting yourself behind the eight ball there, right? Like, you can rank number one, number two, number three, but if your content's a year older than someone else's, you might lose that click-through. You might have a lower click-through rate curve on that query because of how old your content is. So investing in that and then making your site stable, for lack of better words, but having that solid foundation in place really sets you up for success.
How worth it would you say if you have a messed up site architecture that's really unorganized? How would you approach kind of completely reorganizing it in a sound way?
I will say I'm a fan of logically organized structures. So, you know, proper categorization, subcategorization. But with that, folks need to be aware that if you're going to restructure your site, move content around, especially if that results in changing URL structures, there are a lot of implications to that. So don't just make that change without considering the domino effect of doing that. Especially, like I said, if you're going to change URLs, you need to do proper redirect mapping and make sure those things are changing over. But bear in mind, you might still lose some of the authority now that you've redirected those pages. Google has to understand the change. It can take a little bit of time for that thing to happen. So if you're going to make a structure change and you want to be more organized with it, consider the timing of when you're doing it and consider all the implications that are required to do that properly.
And to that point, I mean, if you mess that up, then you're going to be losing a lot of the backlink value if you mess up redirects. Speaking of which, your third point is maintaining the backlink profile and social visibility. Why does that matter?
Yeah, so when you look at a backlink profile, there's kind of two ways of looking at it. If you don't have a large backlink profile or enough compared to your competitors, it's maybe a good time to try and grow that naturally. So that's where creating good content and getting those links coming into it can be very beneficial. But you also want to continually look at your backlink profile and make sure that it's healthy. If you get a lot of toxic links come into play, a lot of spam, I've certainly worked with sites in the past where like teams change every couple years, and maybe someone previously did a tactic that was good. I'm going to say good back then, but now might hurt the site. It may be worth looking at it and cleaning up that backlink profile. Disavowing is a whole different topic in terms of whether that's the right direction or not. But you definitely want to keep that backlink profile healthy because it can hurt you too.
Yeah, and it is, and that is like the disavow. We won't even get into the disavow tool because it's like used in the wrong hands can do some serious damage. So recession SEO, kind of big takeaways there is like, tighten things up, make sure you're paying attention to consumer changing habits. Now, consumer search habits. Contextual organic search journeys. I'm trying to make contextual SEO happen, but honestly, like Bob Dylan said, the SERPs, they are changing. If you've been watching, going online on Google and searching for things, you've seen a bunch of enhancements and a bunch of different features specifically around query refinement, which we'll get into over the past year. A lot of this is kind of with Google. We have this problem where people complain, when they say SEO is dead, they say you go and you search for something and you see the same exact listicles for every single, top organic result. That's why people are now like putting in like their search query with Reddit next to it, which is why you need to pay attention to this idea of information gain. Zach, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, so information gain is interesting. It's certainly something that, to Bill's note on here, that's Bill, but to what he was talking about here, obviously Google, I think, is going to go in this direction. We just had another very good battle zone topic on the idea of information gain as well. But it's the idea of Google beginning to reward the site that offers the most unique information, offers that additional information, offers something that those other sites don't have. Because these sites, just to Garrett's point, all start to look the same. What value are you providing if you're offering the same content as everyone else, maybe with some words changed in it? Now, it does open an interesting question of like, if you start to take advantage of the idea of information gain, make your content differentiated, how long until it then becomes duplicated in other scenarios, especially with things like GPT-3 and all the AI content that might be going on out there? That's a whole different realm. But, certainly the more that you can differentiate yourself, in the long run, I think this is how we're going to start to differentiate the better result in terms of what's showing up in SERPs.
It's going to be really interesting because obviously Google's done a lot with featured snippets and trying to give you the answer if it's a simple question. However, there are so many different nuances depending on like the personalization of SERPs, and like a different type of person might want the same information slightly differently. And to Zach's point, you can differentiate either with your tone of voice or adding new information or going more in depth from a different perspective that might appeal to that user, which leads into, the changes that Google is making. So for instance, literally a few days ago, we've had infinite scroll on mobile for the longest time. Now it's coming to desktop, and there are serious implications of that because now, from like just an SEO perspective of us wanting to report and being like, well, people only, click on the top 3 results of organic anyway, and no one, where do you hide a dead body in SEO on page 2? Like infinite scroll is, going to try to drive the user through this idea of refining your query, that even if you go down, it's not going to, if you go further down and scroll down and down and down and down, you're not going to see just whatever the original search query was trying to answer, because Google doesn't want you to waste your time. Do you have any philosophical opinions on infinite scroll, Zach?
As an SEO, I hate the idea of infinite scroll, but that's more so for accessibility reasons. I get the idea of why they wanted to go that route, but let's be honest. If you're getting to page 2, theoretical page 2, at that point, you're probably rethinking your entire query to begin with anyway. Same thing I think applies to infinite scroll. You're only going to scroll so far before you kind of go, all right, obviously I'm not saying this in the best way. Let me revisit it. I was even trying to find a script last night for something, and I'm on page 2 sitting there going, like, obviously I didn't look at this query the right way. Let me revisit it. So it's going to be the same thing applied to infinite scroll. You're only going to go so far before you rethink it.
And one other point that's really interesting too is, like, sometimes as SEOs, we understand search. So we'll try to manipulate our query or go further down because we know that generic content is at the top of the page. Infinite scroll doesn't really mean infinite. As you'll see in the next slide, Google's going to start trying to do everything they can to help you figure out what you're actually looking for. So, they'll start doing that with autocorrect, for instance, or autocomplete. So if you're going to search, and this has been around for a while, this isn't new, but like if I put in Garrett, like, oh, dude, okay, I thought Garrett Sussman was going to be one of the top autocomplete results. I'm a little embarrassed. Well, what if we look at Zach Chahalis? Google's messed up, man. We should actually be there in autocomplete, but honestly, Google's trying to predict what you're trying to search for. So autocomplete's one of the tools that they do that to refine your query. They've been investing a ton in navigational chips, and this is very much tied to entity SEO, which we'll talk about a little bit later, where Google's trying to understand concepts. But Google is providing many more filters to help you refine your query so you can find exactly what you're looking for. And the examples that I have up here is like in e-commerce, both in terms of attributes of, like, the type of basketball shoe or the brand of basketball shoe. In movies, you've seen those big, visual breakdowns of movies. And so by what genre, it's trying to predict, or what service do you have? Do you have Netflix, or do you have, HBO Max until it's, disbanded? Because Google wants to give you helpful information. And if you don't have that service and you can't watch that movie, it's not as helpful. Coronavirus, obviously the entities all around everything you'd want to know around COVID. For celebrity personalities like Cardi B, any information there that's more accessible and organized. This is an example on mobile of e-commerce. And then just recently, Google's actually trying to add modifiers, like more filter modifiers in your query. This was like a week ago, and this first date ideas. It's not rolled out all over the place, but it is live in the sense of, I put first date ideas. Maybe I'm looking for in Virginia or Illinois or Minnesota. What are your thoughts, Zach, on the navigational chips?
I mean, it's Google trying to make search easier, right? I mean, that's basically what they've been trying to do since the beginning, is provide what they feel is the best experience for their users. In some cases, it's these filter chips, which I think we'll start to see more and more of. Sort of interesting to note that they get rid of the number of results when you start to apply that filter chip. But I don't know. I think there's still an element of Google still trying to figure it out, right? They want to keep people in their experience, honestly, more than trying to send it to a site at some point. So that's why you have things like Knowledge Graph and zero-click results and things that we'll talk about a little bit more later on there. But there's a lot going on in that space, and I think it's only going to become more prevalent over the next couple of years.
Right, which over this past year, that's what we started to see at OnSearch this year. They rolled out, they showed more of these query refinements. So for instance, if you're scrolling in the infinite scroll, you're going to see these little blocks, not at the top, but like in a refine the search. What did you mean? It's another form of autocomplete or related, because now with infinite scroll, usually you'd see related queries at the bottom of the page. Now they're just kind of stuffing it in as you go down. Or broaden the search. Sometimes you get too narrow with your query and you need to go out before you go back in. That's a lot of what MUM is trying to do, and understanding the context of what you're looking for and how they're all related. And then recently, in the past few months, you've seen Google Explore, which in essence is Google Discover, which we've already seen on mobile phones. But this starts to pop up when you're on mobile phone, on your mobile device, and you get to the bottom. And so it's really not infinite scroll. Like you're not going to see the normal results. It's starting to point you in different directions. And I have to laugh from this GIF example because this was in just like SEO. And for whatever reason, apparently Society 6 for SEO is something that Google thinks you'll want to know. Society 6 is like a, design t-shirt website. So to Zach's point, we'll probably see a lot more of these refinement attempts. And with Google Explore, there's this discovery attempt of like, obviously you don't know what you're looking for. So we're going to, kind of surface related content in this more like visual, fun, interesting way. So what is the application? Like, why does it matter when it comes to contextual search and the refinement of these queries? Is that ultimately what you should be doing on your website is creating content that's both in-depth and wide breadth, right? So you want to consider who's searching for your business. Who do you want to find you? Who are these personas? All the different types, because as we mentioned with the information game, they might be looking for different types of information related to the same query. You want to visualize and develop your buyer's journey. Like, how are they starting at the top of the funnel where they don't even understand, what they're looking for? They're barely even aware of the problem. They know they have a problem. They start to search. They go down the funnel towards familiarity where they're like, okay, we understand that there's a problem. We understand there are different solutions. We're going to start to understand what these potential solutions are to solve our problem. Consideration, choosing between the best solution, and then ultimately making a decision. So as you create content throughout this buyer's journey, through these different levels, for these different personas, you're more likely to show up as Google is also trying to refine the queries for the search intent. Zach?
Couldn't agree more.
So it's going to be, I think it's really exciting. This is like the contextual search and the improvement of the SERPs is something that we geek out over. We have a lot of fun with, and I'm excited to see what happens going forward. But back now into like Zach's real bread and butter with all your e-commerce experience. Let's talk about some e-commerce SEO trends. So you can't buy love, but everything else is on the SERPs because there have been a lot of changes to e-commerce.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing to kind of keep an eye on is the product reviews updates. And I said updates as in plural. So we're on at least number 5, and I could possibly see more coming. But this is Google continuing to refine and better understand review content. And I think this is going to really begin to make retailers and sites and folks talking about the reviews of content think about how they are generating that content and how they're serving it. But this continues to get refined, and Google just keeps revisiting it. So it's going to get more difficult to work with. The SERPs are also getting more visual. There's a lot more information that's appearing here before you're really even getting truly to, the first quote unquote organic listing that might appear there. So Google's getting very dynamic with serving product listing information, as well as that product data for available products across different retailers. So what to do in this case? The big thing, honestly, is begin to really enhance your product detail pages. So just having worked with retailers for a long time, if you're getting products from someone else and you're the one selling it and they're giving you a product description, it's the same product description they're giving to everyone else. It goes back to the idea of information gain. What are you providing that's unique in that case? So really need to look at your product descriptions and the content that exists there. Have that be unique. Have that be very well detailed. Set yourself apart from competitors in that space. Also, make sure that you have things like accurate pricing and availability information. I know that sounds simple, but there's nothing that's going to frustrate a customer more than saying like, oh, I see in my rich snippet that the price and availability is this. And I go there and not only is the price more expensive, but now it's not even available. So you're going to lose customers in that case. But also even stuff like having your shipping and return information readily available, showing that, hey, we want your experience to be the best thing it can. Here's how you can return this if you don't like it. Like I mentioned, product reviews, making sure that you're kind of working within how Google is adjusting that algorithm, but the user-generated content aspect of product reviews, the schema markup opportunities, the rich snippets related to it, there's a ton of value in product reviews that needs to be accounted for. And on a similar vein to that, having Q&As and pros and cons about the products too can be very valuable. So something like, again, being a gamer on my side, if I'm looking at like this particular console that we're looking at here, what is the pros and cons of this compared to maybe the Series X that's more expensive and has more features, depending on how you want to get into this conversation with your retail partners, but you could compare it to other consoles in this case, or other products. So, apply to the different types of industries around retailers, but there's a lot of different ways that you can add this content that sets your site apart.
Yeah, and there's so many implications to this. Not only the CRO once they get to your site of making people more likely to buy, but as mentioned before, all of this information is being surfaced in the actual SERP pages. So people might be making their decisions before they even get to your site. So you got to get that right.
Yeah, and even just on that note, real quick, one thing to call out is make sure your site works. I know that sounds simple, but having worked in different retail spaces, but also having worked for a payment company for a point in time, there are a lot of sites that just don't have functioning checkout paths, and that's where you're going to start to lose customers too. So make sure that you're testing and improving that checkout path and that people can actually buy something on your site efficiently.
Yeah, like if you tried to buy a PlayStation 5 last year.
Or even within the last 48 hours, I think some big box retailers have been trying to push those, and the sites were crashing.
Yikes.
Yeah. The other piece too is product images and videos. So, the average attention span these days is like 3 seconds, maybe 5 seconds if you're being generous. If you're not grabbing your users' attention, they're very likely to leave or just not really see you as providing the benefit of why should I buy from you guys. So provide that good experience around images and videos. This is a good example with like Ray-Ban sunglasses where you can zoom in on products, see them, scroll them. You can kind of touch them with augmented reality and a little bit. But video content too. I mean, if you're promoting something that has a trailer or something that you can use to entice people in, video content starts to lengthen that attention span a little bit if done properly. So you can bring people in and keep them on the page with that type of content.
And to that point, I mean, that's how people want to buy. That's why Google is putting so much visual content in the SERPs. And so ultimately, if you're serving up that content, Google's going to continue to make SERPs, especially in e-commerce, more visual. So if you want to show up, it's already table stakes.
And make sure it's working correctly too. The amount of times that I personally, as a shopper, have gone in like, oh, I'll use the Ray-Ban example. I want the gold rimmed sunglasses, but there's no clarity on the page of what color I'm getting. There are certainly some retailers that do this, not that they do. I don't know what I'm buying. Why would I spend that much money without knowing if I'm actually getting the thing I wanted to?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of buyer's guides for anyone that might have tuned into our Black Friday webinar. But buyer's guides can provide a ton of value for a site because this offers the ability to define yourself as an expert in the space around the category that you're talking about. So let's just say, I'm a retailer that sells computers. I can set myself apart by talking about the best computers available. But this also offers a wide variety of extra benefits from an SEO standpoint, because now I can have additional internal linking opportunities where I can bring people directly to those products. I can drive authority to those pages and help make them stronger. But there's also a side effect of people like linking to this type of content. People are looking for, hey, what is the best computer to buy in 2022? And if you're providing that content, it's going to naturally get links. So that's where I was talking about before. Having good content can generate links for your site. And buyer's guides are certainly a way to do that while establishing yourself as an authority in that space. So there are multiple benefits that can be done here, but it's worth caveating. You need to keep up with it too. Having buyer's guide content, the most recent one being 3 years old, it's not going to be providing that value. So if you're going to do it, continue to do it, but think about like maintaining the URL structure and building on that rather than creating and dumping new pages every year.
Oh man, that's such a great piece of advice, because I think a lot of people do kind of blow that up constantly. And then also just in the SERPs, we're seeing a buying guide pack. So, if you have keywords for something that you're selling, look at the SERP and see if it's in there. And then Google's telling you exactly what they want to see. Like in these examples for computer monitors, size, resolution, contrast, price. Like if you're missing any of those attributes in your buying guide, then it's silly because Google's telling you.
Yep. So I'm a big structured data nerd. This is where I geek out the most in SEO. But having proper structured data on a site provides a ton of value and benefits. I know there's always kind of been the rumor that it doesn't necessarily drive organic rankings. I disagree with that vocally, because I have certainly tested that in some cases with different sites I've worked with, and implementing structured data, specifically also product schema, not only helped to improve the rich snippet benefit, but I saw increases and improvement in rankings in the testing samples that we were doing. Not to say that there might not be other things at play, but I do think that there's a factor there. There's a lot of content that you can mark up in structured data, specifically on product pages, all of the information about the product, but also things like your reviews, your ratings, your product availability, and your pricing, especially if you have multiple variants of something, or like a new or a used, or different price points or different applications of it. All that can be marked up with different applications of like an offer markup, and that can start to appear in SERPs. So even if, let's say, your rankings didn't change, but now you're starting to get the rich snippet benefit of showing up in there, if people can start to see some of the information before they come into the site, they may be more likely to click on you. It does have a higher click-through rate usually by getting that rich snippet benefit. So there's a ton of value in this, but you're taking that information on the page and making it essentially more digestible for search engines to understand, and they start to reward you for that. Same thing with FAQ schema. So you've definitely seen a lot more in the SERPs in the last couple of years, where Google's trying to provide the answers to frequently asked questions directly in SERPs. So yes, there may be a side effect of zero-click searches that are going on. You may not always get the traffic, but if you're establishing yourself as an authority, it can start to come back in other ways, maybe not directly attributable, but there's a lot of value in that. But if you're setting yourself as that authority here and providing that information to Google and marking it up, it's going to be extremely valuable for the site in the long run.
And finally, just to call out is like, yes, you want to have your structured data on the actual website implemented properly. If you can't do it yourself, work with your devs on doing that. Historically, to show up in the Google Shopping tab, you had to be in the Google Merchant Center and provide through the merchant feed there. Just recently, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, but Google is allowing you to actually connect your Google Merchant Center to your Google Search Console account. So you can just basically feed your structured data directly to the merchant feed, just more efficiently. So, you know, if you're not an advertiser, like everybody organically can have access to that.
Yeah, and worth saying there too, Google has fully said, hey, we are using structured data to validate your product feed. So even if you are running the paid portion of things and you can't keep up with updating your product feed information correctly enough, as long as you're submitting a valid and proper feed, they can rely on something like your structured data markup to get accurate pricing and availability information and gut check that against what's in your feed.
Yep. And to that point, always look at your own SERP results, because Google has been known to pull different information from different types of contents. If you're working with different retailers, it can get ugly for your users if you're not on top of that. Okay, Entity SEO, we are cruising. We've been covering a lot, so we're going to cruise through some of the rest of this stuff because we have a lot of great content. So Entity SEO, yo dog, I heard you like things, so I made a thing with a thing that's related to your thing. Yeah, little exhibit action. So what are entities? Entities are concepts. They're Google's greater understanding where, you know, as algorithms become more complicated, they're not just depending on specific words to understand what your content is about. It's really generating this whole idea of a concept and being able to understand that across languages, between relationships. If you are not familiar with Entity SEO, highly recommend that you check out the webinar that our own Michael King, Cindy Crum, and Rupert Reedy did a couple months ago. They get into all the technical aspects. We're just going to run through some high-level aspects, which are just that, you know, the knowledge graph, entity relationships, and topical authority, that this is how it works. Google is starting to understand through this knowledge graph. It takes all these concepts and it has a whole range of attributes. So it understands like basically everything about mother, brother, in this example, Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson, like who they're related to, what they've been in, what their professions are, all those attributes about them, how they're related. And then it serves up the rankings based on that understanding of these entities. So In terms of the practical application, you want to establish your business, your website as an entity online based on all the content and data on your website, but also on the relationships and the links between other relevant entities within your sphere, your topic that you're trying to become, an authority on. Here's an example of, structured data schema for your organization, your business. Yes, they have a fax number in there. Anything that you want to call out about the schema, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you're taking that information about the entity and making it more digestible for search engines. My opinion is the script is relatively light. This is an example straight from Google. But there's a lot of information that you can mark up here that gives search engines an understanding around what that entity is for the organization or group that you're working with.
And to that point, you've talked a lot about, in terms of EAT, expertise, authoritative, and trustworthiness, how the authors and individual author details play into this too.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, I think authors use the tick less more often, and you start to see people a little bit more, or person specifically. But there's the idea of starting to tie all that stuff together, right? So if you're writing an article, there's opportunities within the structured data to call out not only who the author is and tie to their person markup or an author page specifically that has that markup in place, but you can also tie back to the publisher, which is the organization markup we were just talking about. So now you can start to say, hey, these entities are all kind of working together. This organization is more authoritative on this topic because they have this entity of this person that's quote unquote working for it or writing content for it. And they're an expert in this space because of their background or what they do or what they write about. So you can start to tie all this information together through your structured data and start to emphasize that to search engines.
And that's how Google understands who are the authorities on the subject. Additionally, ways to kind of beef up your entity SEO and tell Google about these different relationships is using semantic markup. So not just your old HTML bland like div, but actually using the semantic HTML to show Google exactly what different sections of your site are intended to do, like article, as Zach mentioned, and then also using semantic markup in terms of letting Google know through the code, through the markup, the relationship with other entities. For instance, in this example from inlinks, about, and mentions, you can mention in an article what you're also talking about there, so Google knows there's a relationship between your business, that article, and whatever the entity is that's being brought up. So what you need to do is audit your entity, and how you do that. Google actually provides the NLP API where they tell you, the content on your site, how they understand that, how they kind of categorize your entity, using things like Wikipedia and the general knowledge graph, where you can look at and see how Google understands you. And then building out, a big thing is building out your wiki data. Zach, you want to talk to the wiki data? We were joking about this earlier.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of trying to get a wiki data or a Wikipedia page created and supporting of a particular entity, where I guess I kind of laugh with the ideas. It is increasingly more difficult to do that, right? So both of these are getting a lot, if they weren't already, Wikipedia definitely was, a lot stricter on the idea of soapboxing and getting rid of anything that they deem even remotely promotional. So you need to be very cautious about how you approach creating any of these entities or editing them within these services, because if they start to deem that content as promotional or soapboxing, it's going to be gone before you can even blink an eye. They're very quick to revert or delete content that they just don't like.
Exactly. And to that point, it's harder because Google want, and these organizations independent of Google want to get this information to be trustworthy, but Google does depend on them because of the amount of kind of roadblocks they put in, from just anyone being able to put in anything and it not being kind of definitive and authoritative and trustworthy in that sense. I mean, the final thing you can do is, just from a content perspective, is build out topic clusters, really create content around the topic and the relevant, the in-depth and the breadth of the topic that you're trying to become an authority for. I feel like people have talked a lot about topic clusters. That was a very big trend last year, and it goes back to the site architecture of your site. But really, cover everything when it comes to your topic. Okay, the big one. I kind of, hopefully we don't go over, but we're breezing through, and we've got a lot more to go through. So let's keep diving in. I'll be back for your SEO and content jobs. If you've lived under a rock, basically OpenAI, which is uses GPT-3, is like kind of the most mainstream commercial accessible version of AI out there, just released in the past couple of weeks. ChatGPT, which is a free way to just ask AI to spit out, OpenAI to spit out content. Our own Michael King wrote a very definitive blog post around why AI content is actually not the SEO threat, because you've had all these hot takes about people saying, oh, well, now we don't even need content creators and SEOs anymore because the AI will be able to produce all this content, answer all the questions, and anybody can do it. And Mike explains, and we'll get into some high-level details, but why that is not the case, because you need to understand the way that these large language models work. So they're based on the LLMs, the large language models, which take millions and billions of parameters, and they look at a millions, I guess billions at this point, corpus of documents. So they look at the Wikipedias, they look at, all the different, even like Reddit, I think he mentioned in this article, to inform and try to predict what the next word is for the content that's going to be generated. Zach, did I get that right in terms of the way GPT-3 and NLG works?
Yeah, I mean, worth kind of calling out here that you can train these models based on either certain data sources or the ingestion of content as well. So in theory, you can refine how well the model's working depending on how you're training it.
Right. And so they're getting really, really good. I mean, they can definitely deceive most people in terms of like projecting that they're creating this new novel ideas. But there's actually this paper written by Timnit Gebru along with a bunch of great researchers on the problems with natural language generation from large language models. And so what their research paper point out is like, the LLMs aren't actually writing. They're doing this like kind of predictive what the next word is. There's nothing new that they're coming up with. It's all based on what they've been trained on, to Zach's point. The other problems are that it costs a lot of money to do the computational expense of machine learning and analysis and surfacing insights. So that's just like resource heavy. That's problematic, which also has an environmental and social impact. The other thing is they're only generating content based on the documents that they can read, which can be biased in their training. So like if you were to give, a LLM a bunch of like Nazi materials, it's going to be racist as hell. Like if you're only giving it content from one perspective, the content it generates is going to be based on that perspective. And then, as we mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, it's a static viewpoint. So, for instance, the OpenAI GPT-3 is all based on 2021 documents. Anything that's been created or changed or updated since then, it's not going to take into consideration with its output. Zach?
Yeah, worth noting on the bias piece. So I actually did remember and look back at this. But yeah, Microsoft had an AI chatbot that essentially was trained through Twitter to become racist. And that thing lasted, I think, all of 6 days. So it was Tay was the Twitter bot. So like it can be very biased depending on how you're training that model. And it can end very badly in that case.
It's so problematic. But that said, it's not going to take over the web. Google is at the very least trying to, so they released a couple months ago the helpful content system, and they actually updated this for V2 recently, where Google is trying to make sure that the content that's being generated, this raw AI that is problematic, doesn't just always rank, especially if it's like factually incorrect, because that happens a lot with AI too. So basically the system is site-wide. It looks at all of your content to determine whether it's helpful or unhelpful. They initially had some, like, it felt more explicit in terms of saying like, don't really use AI content because we think that's not helpful content. We're going to talk about ways that you actually can use AI content, but in the updated version that came out last week, they said the only real mention is, are you using extensive automation to produce content on many topics? It's not definitively don't use it, but basically, if you're using raw AI content, chances are it's not the output's not going to be great, at which point Google is going to recognize that and not, rank. Mike mentioned in his post in terms of generally in their spam guidelines, spammy automatically generated content where if a human has never touched it, like if you're literally putting out whatever the AI puts out, that's going to be problematic. That's not something that Google wants in the search results. Do you have any thoughts on Google's perspective on AI content, Zach?
I have a lot of opinions on that. Yeah, I mean, I do think there's a very good use case for it, and I think Google can be very good at identifying it, but it can also struggle in some cases with identifying it as well. It really depends on the level of oversight that's involved in those cases, because if you're starting to look at, hey, let's use this bot to create the majority of my content, but let's actually go back and fact check it, edit it, make it more readable, make it accurate. It can really get by the spam guidelines pretty quickly and start to be confused with human generated content. Just depends on the level of depth and time that you put into it.
And to that point, like we've seen 5 product review update iterations. I'm sure we will continue to see Google at least try to get better. But yeah, once the human touches it, it's a lot hard. Although I made a joke on Twitter a few weeks ago about, there is some AI content that is better than really bad human content. I mean, just because you're human doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to win. You don't get preference. So just to visualize and show some examples, both funny and why it's problematic. Here's an example from Multiland where he's like, yes, the chat GPT, which people have been using, explain the EAT concept in SEO in the style of a fast-talking wise guy from a 1940s gangster movie. Says, all right, here's the deal, kid. EAT is a big deal in the world of search engine optimization. It stands for expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness, and it's all about making sure your website content is the cream of the crop. I'm not going to embarrass myself anymore, but as you can see, it can do some pretty hilarious, fun things. However, in this situation that Zach did, can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so I'll just add some context here real quick, but I've got a buddy named Jim Gordon. For anyone that's aware in the analytics space, you might know Jim, but he's big in the analytics world. And I was kind of messing around because he saw a bunch of folks playing with this. So I said, hey, tell me about the real Jim Gordon. And for anyone that's familiar from the comic book perspective, basically says he doesn't exist. He's a fictional character. So, you can definitely, this is where it's like, it's not necessarily missing, or it is missing the context around what you're truly trying to get to in that case, but me having a little bit of fun.
So it's a trend, but it's really not completely a threat because for content writers, if you're having someone write, they can't just depend on GPT to completely produce this content because it's going to have factual issues. In this example, Tim actually was trying confuse the AI about this whole sailfish and whether or not it's a mammal. And so he asked a question and the AI was like, yes, it is a mammal. And then it's like, oh, I made a mistake. It's not a mammal. Yes, it is. And it kept catching him in these traps where the AI ultimately was not putting out factual information. And so if you are working with a writer, if you're working with, GPT-3 and AI content, you really need to fact check it. You can't assume that the content it's producing is accurate. But there are use cases that Mike references in his blog post, which are, and I just want to also call out, we are about at time. Zach and I love talking about this stuff, which is why we can never keep it under an hour. I always try my best and then I put in too much content. So if you do have to leave, we totally understand. We will be sending out the entire webinar replay after this is over. It'll be uploaded on YouTube as well. So if you have to leave, you will still be able to come back and check in. If you're around, stick around and we will cover a little bit more. So a couple of specific use cases that you actually could use GPT-3 to scale as long as you have kind of human moderation is consider using it for summaries, meta descriptions, ad copy. I asked it to look at hrefs and do a meta description for its homepage. Although Zach noticed one thing here. What did you say?
Well, and it's not like the end of the world or anything, but it's not taking into account character limitations and cutoff. So it's still a relatively good description, but it might get truncated and search results are rewritten. So it might be a good start point that maybe you want to further craft before you implement it.
And to that point, there are a lot of tools already that are building out, like content briefs with AI. Phrase.io, Jasper, Keyword Insights all do a really good job of basically searching through the internet based on the query that you're trying to rank for, and then creating a comprehensive content brief based on the results that Google is providing, identifying, co-occurring terms that are referenced a certain amount of times, statistics that are referenced, headlines, and all of these can actually help you produce great content, and that you can improve upon the existing content out there, but identifying what Google is kind of looking for and considering the highest ranking versions outside of like links. And then image generation. So I had to give a bad example, but AI, if you use DALL-E, it's awesome. It creates so much cool content. In this example, I asked for a futuristic neon cityscape with the words 2023 SEO trends on the marquee of a movie theater. It got everything right except for the text. So my recommendation is it really can do awesome things. Just don't ask it to actually get text in there. Zach, do you have any thoughts on image generation?
I give it time; it'll only get better.
Yeah, I think image generation actually probably will be like foolproof within the next few years.
Yeah, and you do see like it certainly has gotten stronger. I mean, I've definitely seen situations. I think our own Mike got referenced in one that was AI generated within the last week or so. It was interesting, a little off, but I could see how the model started to put it together.
Yeah, I mean, there's a joke like even a few months ago where it's like AI imagery has issues with hands. Like if you ever look at the hands or faces of AI, they can get really like nightmare fuelish.
Missing fingers.
Yeah, but it'll get there. I mean, I really do feel confident. And so finally, as we started with the whole webinar, we talked about, that when it comes down to SEO trends, yes, there are things that you can implement. There are things that you have to consider, recession and changing SERPs and AI content and all that, but it comes down to the boring fundamentals. So we're going to hit on that real quick. Because honestly, SEO fundamentals are like Chuck Taylors. They never go out of style. Zach?
Yeah, so as we kind of mentioned earlier on, really everything that's been talked about for many years now is still should be focused on going into 2023. That does include having a proper site architecture and proper organization of your site. Search engines want to be able to effectively crawl it and navigate it in order to find all of that content. So that's not going to change going into 23. That's still going to be valuable. Just make sure you're doing everything related to that. I hate to be the cheesy guy for 10 years now saying content is still king, but it is. You do want to have good content. You want to leverage subject matter experts. You want to differentiate yourself, especially as information gain becomes more utilized in terms of the algorithm.
If you want an example, this GIF is from NerdWallet. They do comprehensive expert content so effectively.
Mm-hmm. I kind of joked about it earlier on, but backlinking is still going to be a thing. Now, does it maybe become slightly different weight? Possibly. But backlinking is still going to continue to be a key part of the algorithm and how everything is measured. So Google will continue to look at that. They will look at your links as votes or authority of trust. So it's kind of a side effect of both, growing your backlink profile, but also maintaining the health of your backlink profile. Internal linking is, to me, kind of the lifeblood of a website. So as you think about the concept of page rank and authority flowing throughout the site, it relies heavily on internal linking, both for search engines to figure out how to navigate and crawl through, but also for that authority to flow down into those deeper pages of the site. So there's tons of opportunity around internal linking strategies. And honestly, one of the biggest things I see in working with clients for the last 14 plus years is internal linking strategies can always be further enhanced. And then you really start to see the benefit of that from a ranking perspective by implementing those.
Exactly. So you tie all this together, especially technical SEO.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like we said before, technical SEO and making sure your website's crawlable and accessible, it's that foundation of everything that you do. You could have the greatest content in the world, but if your site's not accessible, is Google finding it? And then are users finding it? So it's very important to make sure that you are doing, for lack of better words, the boring SEO fundamentals and technical, having an XML sitemap, having proper canonicalization strategy, addressing errors and cleaning up the overall health of your site, making sure that that content is actually rendering for search engines, especially as more sites rely on JavaScript-based frameworks and are not fully evaluating if that's rendering properly for Googlebot or other search engine crawlers. So make sure that that's being done.
And put mechanisms in place to let you know if anything's broken. Like someone should be monitoring so that you don't find out, months down the line when revenue is like plummeted, like, oh, why did this happen? Oh, this JavaScript, resource broke and all of a sudden our content's not being served up anymore. Like, don't let that happen.
And automated testing too. Heavily recommend having some testing policies in place. The amount of times I've seen sites take a step backwards because they push code that inadvertently broke something. I would be rich if I had $1 for every time I've seen that happen.
So finally, to end all of this, on Tuesday, we are launching our boring SEO predictions and totally ridiculous ones. I reached out to the community, got over 40 different answers. So just a little context, the boring SEOs are the obvious ones, like make sure you create more video because, Google wants images and videos and visuals in search. And then the most ridiculous ones, which actually sometimes pan out. I believe Roxana Stingu last year's version said infinite scroll was coming to desktop. And here we are like a week before the end of 2023 and we've got infinite scroll. So I just want to run through some of these real quick and have Zach kind of say thumbs up, thumbs down, or his thoughts. So here we go. First off, from Justin Borge, I love this one. Ridiculous prediction. We're going to be seeing lots of microsites pop up that cover a single topic extremely well. Imagine finding a search query like best dog food for allergies that gets 9,000 searches per month with low difficulty score. Then you buy the domain with the query bestdogfoodforallergies.com, create an epic topic cluster around it, covering that query from all angles. It's on his personal radar. What do you think of the microsite angle?
I think it could work, but there's so much else that needs to happen in order for that to be successful, right? Because if you're creating microsites for everything, you're essentially starting over from linking every time. So it depends on how you're going about that strategy, the content creation, everything like that. It can certainly be done, but there are other factors at play here. It would be interesting to play with, though.
It's going to be interesting to see if we actually see backlinks devalued at some point, like Google keeps claiming. Who knows? Boring prediction from Roxana Singh says, AI-produced content is as good as any person summarizing the top 10 ranking articles in order to create a new one. As such, I think we'll still see a lot of AI-generated content in the SERPs even in 2023. I think so. What do you think, Zach? Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Okay, Jess Joyce, ridiculous prediction. Google local guides will evolve into Google Plus integrated into the SERP, or web rings become a thing again. There was a joke when everyone was saying Twitter was going to crash because of Elon Musk that Google should bring back Google Plus. Google local guides is something that's been around but never really has a social component. Zach, Google Plus, what do you think?
Ooh. All right. I at some point, and I don't think it's going to be 2023, but I do think Google might try the social media game again. Maybe local guides could be a part of that. Web rings, without naming names, I have still seen examples where that can work to a point, but I'm not sure if it would prominently come back. It would be interesting to keep an eye on that one, though.
Boring prediction from Karina Burry. Backlinks will have a lower ranking factor. Only good quality content counts. Google keeps saying this. Is it boring? What do you think, Zach?
I don't think it's a boring prediction. I don't know. Yeah, because Google keeps saying that they're going to start devaluing the idea of links and focus more on content. But then you see something like GPT-3 starting to get more heavily emphasized, and maybe they start rethinking that idea a little bit. I do think over time backlinks might get devalued a bit more, but I don't think it's going to fall off the radar in terms of being a top ranking consideration.
Okay, from Mercy Jenicky says, Google will penalize the sites that have super uncountable pop-ups, email signups, demo request forms, white paper downloads, thinking it helps the user. I forgot at times why I came to the website seeing all these blockers everywhere. To that point, I remember with Web Core Vitals, there's a lot of talk about, like the CID and FID would have an impact, and like interstitials, they've made stuff around interstitials in the past, but like it doesn't seem like it's hurt rankings. What do you think, Zach?
I wish. All right, so there's kind of two things here. Google did come up with the idea of like, hey, we're going to penalize people for heavy interstitials many years ago. Maybe they are in pockets, but I mean, I still see plenty of sites I go to, specifically news sites, but also a good amount of B2B and B2C sites where you're just suddenly getting an interstitial pop up or something, especially in the scenarios where the X to close out is not readily available or apparent that it's there. Maybe it's the same color as the background, which is a different cloaking issue. I wish that they would focus a little bit more on that and penalize on that. I have heavily recommended to folks I've worked with in the past to avoid doing that when they have been. I do think things like white paper downloads, things like that, they can be done in graceful ways. Like a properly implemented banner, for example, that doesn't take up the page, or, gracefully working that into content. But this whole thing also ties back to your point around Core Web Vitals and CLS measurement, because a lot of the folks I see in these banners, especially on the interstitial side as well, is loading in after the fact. So now you're impacting your CLS scores. If I'm seeing CLS scores get impacted because an ad on the page is changing sizes, you can definitely bet that it's going to be changing and your scores are going to be very poor if you're adding in a banner, let alone an entire page interstitial.
Exactly. And Core Web Vitals is a whole other category. The one thing I will plant my flag in the hill on is I truly believe that Google should penalize paywall sites in the organic SERPs, or not penalize, but at least label them as such, so that if you're searching for something and you can't read it if you don't have a subscription, at least you know that before you go to the site.
Yeah, that gets into a whole different realm that we don't have time to talk.
From Miriam Jessier, search patterns are going to change. We need to consider more and more how content should be made discoverable, not just searchable, which kind of plays into a lot of what we were talking about earlier with contextual search and the changing search.
Yeah.
So,
100%.
Celeste Gonzalez, AI images from DALL-E and other systems will overrun websites and Google business profiles. I know Celeste is on the local SEO level, like just basically putting inauthentic content in there. I mean, I don't think it actually will, but I wouldn't be surprised if people did try to leverage it more.
That's where I'm at. I think people will try and leverage it. I knowing multiple people with small businesses, local businesses, things like that, maybe might try and go that route. Or national chains that are struggling to have proper imagery or photography around their stores. Could see it happen. Will it be overrun? That's where I start to question it. But I think it will become increasingly used.
I agree. And zero-click, this is from Crystal Audane. Zero-click results will continue to expand as Google finds more innovative ways to help their users directly in the SERPs. Boring prediction. I agree. I hope we see more cool ways. I like when new features come up in the SERPs.
I would agree. And then on top of that, of course, Google needs to make money on their own too. So they're also finding ways to keep people in their environment versus sending it to others. A big example of that being hotel and airfare functionality versus going to like an Expedia or a Travelocity.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting. I've heard from folks in the past about e-commerce wise the ability at some point. I wouldn't be shocked if you can literally purchase something from a website on Google. Like that functionality probably isn't too far away.
Agreed.
From Muffy, meta keyword tag. No way. Meta keyword tags will again be back and an important ranking factor while ranking websites on Google. No.
All right. Point of clarity: meta keyword tags, in theory, never went away because they can still be used for on-site search. Now, coming back as an organic ranking factor, no, I don't think that's going to come back. That was too heavily spammed to really come back in an effective way, but it's still definitely necessary in some cases for on-site search functions.
Yeah, it's not like keyword stuffing in local businesses still work. That's a whole other can of worms. Okay, and Montserrat Cano says we might pay a bit more attention to image optimization and schema markup to differentiate our brands online. And Zach's gonna laugh at this, but only a few brands will get it right through 2023.
Yeah, 100% agree. As the schema geek and nerd that I am, a lot of times when I look at sites now that should be doing schema properly, they are not, and I think that's a big missed opportunity that I don't think people are going to start fixing next year.
No, they really should. Simon Cox, I believe this is the last one, is that in the context of the whole AI will run amok at Google, rewriting not only headings, but all content in the SERP, including recreating images that it thinks better suits the intent of the search. This destroys Google's search reputation and a new search engine will arise. There was earlier in the year, Google rewriting the headings and the meta descriptions, which they had always actually done, or not always, but have been doing for a while. I can't imagine they do anything like this. Although the idea of for websites that don't have the budget to create great imagery of like Google just doing that for you, like that wouldn't be bad.
Yeah, I love Simon. This, yeah, it's an interesting prediction. I agree with you. I think it will become increasingly part of things, but I don't think it's going to destroy Google's reputation and get to that level. May lead to new search engines coming out, or may be used by other search engines to become more prevalent. But yeah.
So there we go. Don't really have time for questions. If there are any in the chat, feel free to ask them. I appreciate everybody who's been sticking around, watching through this. For those of you in the future who are watching the replay of this, I hope you got a good chuckle. You know, when you do these webinars, these virtual webinars, you can't really, you don't get like that audience response a lot of times. So my name is Garrett Sussman of iPullRank. This is Zach Chahalis, the director of SEO at iPullRank. Quick commercial for some of the stuff that we do. If you enjoyed this and want to check out more iPullRank content, we've got our own SEO playbook in economic uncertainty. So really a 40-pager with quotes from Zach, among other folks at other companies, talking about what you should be doing more in depth when it comes to the recession and SEO and consumer behavior changing and different industries. So that's a free playbook that you can download. We have a very special offer over the next week, which is our data-backed keyword portfolio kickoff. So if you want 5,000 keywords that are researched by our team, you know, in terms of a meeting with you and your team to discuss and understand your business goals, and then building out topic cluster targeting, creating content ideation, targeting for each of these clusters. And then we have our proprietary, you know, in beta, awesome rank tracking tool, Exact Science, which will give you 3 months access to. There's the link to that. And then SEO Weekly, the last one is coming out on Monday. I've been doing it every week where I cover everything going on in the world of SEO, you know, like blogs, webinars, podcasts, Google updates, the SEO Twitter community, you name it, I'm on it.
Last one for this year. Let's be clear.
Yeah.
It's not going away. Yeah.
Yes, no, it's, but we got some big fun changes coming to it. And then Rankable, which is the podcast where I've interviewed a ton of people in our industry who are all brilliant. Zach's been on there. Believe it or not, he talked about structured data when I had him on, and we had a lot of fun. So check that out. Once again, my name's Garrett. Zach, anything you want to say to the good people before we leave, sir?
No, I appreciate everyone joining in. Wishing everyone a happy holidays and a happy new year. And yeah, reach out if we can help answer any questions or you want to learn more.
Exactly. There's our email, and we both hang out on the Twitters. I'll probably hang out more on LinkedIn in 2023. That's my own personal social media trend. But thank you for joining us. We will catch you in the new year. Peace out.